The year was 2475. Earth had changed, yet the stars above remained the same silent guardians they had always been. The planet was crowded now, humming with towers that reached the clouds, glowing rivers of light stretching across continents, and cities suspended in the sky like islands of glass. Humanity had mastered energy, rebuilt ecosystems, and stretched technology far beyond imagination. But curiosity is endless. And so the story begins with a single ship resting in the orbital docks above Earth. Its name was Aurora. Aurora was unlike any vessel ever built before. She was designed not for months or years of travel, but for centuries. Her engines pulsed with quantum plasma, capable of folding distances that once seemed unreachable. She was more than a ship. She was a city, a sanctuary, a library, and a garden. Inside her walls lived 1,000 souls. They were chosen not for their strength or wealth, but for their spirit. Each of them carried a dream, dreams of crossing the horizon of the known universe. Among them was Aria, a historian. Her task was not to fight or invent, but to remember. She carried with her the stories of humanity, thousands of years of victories and failures, songs and poems, voices of people long gone. Her duty was simple, yet profound. She would whisper the past into the ears of the future. On the eve of departure, she stood before the great observation dome. Beneath her, Earth floated, blue and white, wrapped in a veil of atmosphere, fragile and beautiful. She pressed her palm against the glass and whispered to herself, "We are leaving home." But home will always remain inside us. All around her, the ship stirred with life. Families settled in their new quarters, arranging the few personal belongings they had been allowed to bring. Children stared wide-eyed at the stars, too young to understand the meaning of the journey ahead. Scientists checked and rechecked their instruments, though the machines had been tested 1,000 times before. Engineers walked the corridors slowly, listening to the hum of power in the walls, feeling for the rhythm of the ship as if it were alive. The gardens, carefully grown inside vast glass chambers, filled the air with a gentle scent of earth and leaves. It was a reminder of the world they were leaving behind. Every tree, every flower had been chosen with care. Oaks, maples, and pines stood beside fruit trees and medicinal herbs. The people would need food, yes, but also memory. The memory of forests and fields, the comfort of green, the whisper of wind through leaves. Aria wandered through the garden that last evening. She listened to the soft trickle of an artificial stream, watched the fish gliding slowly through clear water, and thought of rivers back on Earth. Rivers that carved valleys, rivers that carried boats, rivers that held stories of generations. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. This, she thought, is what we must carry with us. Not only machines, but life. Not only technology, but beauty. The call of the captain soon echoed through the ship, calm, deliberate, steady. "Crew of the Aurora," he said, "tonight we cross the threshold of history. We sail for Proxima Centauri, 4 light years away. It will take generations to arrive, but our children will walk beneath another sun. Their children may call another planet home. We are not abandoning Earth. We are extending her heartbeat into the stars." A hush fell across the vessel. Even the children grew quiet, sensing the weight of the words. Some pressed their foreheads against the cool glass of the dome. Some held hands, whispering promises of courage and hope. And some stood silently, simply watching as their world hung below them. Slowly, the engines awoke. They pulsed with a low vibration, a deep hum that filled the corridors and chambers like the heartbeat of a giant. The ship trembled, alive, eager. The orbital dock released its hold. With a slow, graceful motion, Aurora drifted free. Earth began to shrink behind them, a pale jewel suspended in endless dark. The continents glowed with threads of light, rivers of civilization, fragile and magnificent. The oceans shimmered in silver reflections. Clouds curled like brushstrokes of white paint across a canvas of blue. It was a sight both breathtaking and heartbreaking. Aria pressed her notebook to her chest. She opened it carefully and wrote the first entry. Day 1. We have left Earth. The journey begins. The engines of the Aurora continued their steady hum, a rhythm that echoed through every corridor and chamber. It was a sound unlike any other. A low, constant vibration, soft enough to soothe, strong enough to remind everyone that they were moving farther from Earth with each passing second. Night came quickly, though in truth there was no night and no day in the endless dark of space. The ship's inner lights dimmed, shifting from bright white to a warm golden glow, imitating the fading of the sun. Slowly, people began to retreat into their quarters. Conversations hushed, footsteps softened, and the ship itself seemed to take a deeper breath, as if preparing to sleep alongside its passengers. Aria wandered through one of the quieter halls, her notebook still in her hands. She paused at a wide window and looked out. The stars stretched in every direction, sharper and brighter than they had ever appeared from Earth. Without the haze of atmosphere, they glittered like tiny fires frozen in time. There was no horizon, no boundary, only an endless ocean of light. Children clustered at another window nearby, their faces pressed against the glass. One pointed to a cluster of stars and whispered something about treasure. Another giggled and said they looked like spilled diamonds. A mother gently pulled them back, whispering that it was time to rest. The children obeyed, though reluctantly, turning their eyes from the infinite sky. Inside the cabins, people settled into beds designed for comfort over decades. Thin sheets tucked around them, soft padding beneath. For many, it was the first time they had slept without the pull of Earth's gravity. The sensation was strange, lighter, looser, as if they were drifting before even closing their eyes. Some found it unsettling, while others smiled, calling it peaceful. The gardens, too, fell quiet. Artificial streams trickled with the same slow rhythm as before, but the voices that had filled the space grew silent. The air was rich with the scent of green leaves and damp soil, calming to those who lingered among the trees. A few passengers stayed late, sitting on benches carved from smooth stone, simply listening to the hum of engines blending with the rustle of leaves. For them, it felt like resting beneath a summer forest, even though they were millions of miles away from the only forests humanity had ever known. Aria finally returned to her own quarters. A single lamp glowed faintly in the corner, casting a warm circle of light on the desk. She sat down, opened her notebook, and began to write again. Day 1, nightfall. The ship grows quieter now. Families have settled. The children sleep, though some still whisper about the stars. The hum of the engines is steady, like a heartbeat that will carry us forward. It is strange to think that this sound may become as familiar as the sound of rain once was on Earth. Perhaps future generations will find comfort in it, as I once found comfort in the rustle of wind through trees. She paused, letting the words linger. The silence of her cabin was deep, but not empty. It was filled with the weight of distance, the awareness that Earth was already far behind. She tried to imagine it, shrinking into the background, turning into a star no different from the countless others outside her window. The thought was both painful and strangely freeing. Lying back on her bed, Aria closed her eyes. The faint vibration of the ship traveled through the mattress, a constant reminder of movement. She thought of the captain's words, of generations who would live and die within these walls. She wondered what dreams the children would carry, what new stories would grow as centuries passed. And then she listened, to the hum, to the silence, to the endless quiet beyond the hull. Slowly, gently, the rhythm of the ship lulled her into sleep. Aurora drifted on, a lone island of light in the vast sea of darkness. Her passengers dreamed, each in their own way, carrying with them pieces of Earth, memories, hopes, fears, and the fragile spark of curiosity that had brought them here. The first night was long, but it was only the beginning. Morning on Aurora was not marked by the rising of a sun, but by the soft shifting of the ship's lights. The golden glow brightened slowly, filling the corridors with gentle warmth. For many, it was still strange to wake without the rhythm of Earth, the cycle of day and night, the familiar pull of gravity. Yet here, aboard the ship, another kind of rhythm was forming. One of the first places to stir with life was the gardens. Vast domes stretched like glass cathedrals, housing forests, orchards, and winding paths. Artificial sunlight streamed down, timed to mimic the gentle arc of dawn. Leaves glistened with dew created by hidden machines. The air smelled fresh, rich with oxygen and the earthy scent of soil. Families wandered among the trees, their voices soft, their steps slow. Children chased each other along the stone paths, laughing as their footsteps echoed against the dome walls. Elders sat on benches carved from pale wood, closing their eyes and breathing deeply, savoring the illusion of a morning on Earth. These gardens were not only for survival, they were memory made physical. Each plant had been chosen with purpose. There were fruit trees from distant orchards, wildflowers gathered from meadows, and ancient oaks whose seeds had been preserved for centuries. To walk among them was to remember. To breathe here was to carry Earth forward into the stars. Aria loved the gardens most of all. She often came here with her notebook, letting the whispers of leaves and the soft trickle of streams inspire her words. On this second day, she found herself beneath a tall willow tree, its branches swaying gently in artificial wind. She wrote, "Day 2. The gardens awaken with us. Here, Earth is alive again. The air feels familiar, though the stars above remind us of our distance. These trees are more than food and shelter. They are anchors for our memory, bridges to a world we cannot return to. Perhaps, for the children who grow here, the gardens will become Earth itself." Nearby, a young boy crouched beside a small pond, watching the fish glide lazily beneath the surface. He asked his mother if the fish knew they were in space. She smiled softly and said perhaps they did not, but perhaps it did not matter. They lived, they breathed, they moved gracefully, and that was enough. The gardens held moments like this everywhere, quiet reminders that life could flourish even here, adrift between stars. Birds fluttered among branches, their wings catching the light. Bees moved from flower to flower, carrying out their endless work. Each sound, each scent, was a thread connecting the passengers to the world they had left behind. The captain often walked through the gardens in silence, his hands clasped behind his back. He would pause to listen, sometimes closing his eyes, as if measuring the heartbeat of the ship by the song of its leaves. Few disturbed him during these walks. It was said that even leaders needed a place to feel small, and the gardens offered that gift freely. Aria continued writing, her words flowing slowly. I wonder if one day these trees will feel more like home than the ones on Earth ever did. If so, perhaps that will not be loss, but transformation. Perhaps the memory of Earth is not meant to remain still, but to grow and change with us. The artificial sunlight grew stronger, illuminating every corner of the domes. Children laughed louder, footsteps grew quicker, and the gardens filled with gentle movement. Yet beneath it all, the hum of the engines continued, steady and patient, reminding everyone that they were still voyagers, still moving through endless night. In the gardens of memory, Earth lived on, not as it had been, but as it might become, a place of growth, of quiet, of beauty carried carefully into the stars. Life aboard Aurora quickly began to find a rhythm. Adults busied themselves with duties, checking instruments, maintaining systems, studying data from the stars. But the children, unburdened by responsibility, explored the ship with wide eyes and endless wonder. For them, the voyage was not a mission of history, but simply life. They had no memories of a planet filled with oceans and forests stretching to the horizon. Their world was the long corridors of Aurora, the glow of artificial skies, and the ever-present hum of the engines. To them, it felt natural, as if they had always belonged among the stars. In the mornings, the children gathered in learning halls where teachers guided them through lessons. They learned of Earth, not only its geography and history, but its smells, its sounds, its textures. Books and holograms showed them mountains capped with snow, fields of golden wheat, and waves crashing endlessly against rocky shores. Some children gasped at the sight of animals they had never seen, creatures that once roamed freely across open lands. Aria sometimes joined these lessons. She would read aloud old poems and stories, her voice carrying words written by those who had lived centuries before. The children listened with quiet fascination, though some asked simple questions that broke her heart. "What does rain sound like?" one asked. "Does the ocean really move without machines?" She answered gently, painting pictures with her words. Rain was like soft drumming on the roof of your home, like millions of tiny fingers tapping gently on the earth. The ocean was alive, restless, always moving, always breathing. She told them that someday, when Aurora reached its destination, perhaps they would see such things with their own eyes. Until then, imagination would be their bridge. When lessons ended, laughter filled the gardens. Children ran between trees, their shouts echoing beneath the glass domes. They played games among flowers, chasing each other around streams and ponds. Sometimes they pretended the gardens were forests from old stories, giving names to trees, declaring one pond to be an ocean, another to be a secret lake. At night, many of them pressed their faces against the great windows of the observation dome. They whispered to each other about the stars, inventing shapes and constellations of their own. Some believed the stars were lanterns lit by travelers long ago. Others imagined them as doors to secret worlds. A little girl once whispered that the stars were the eyes of Earth, watching them to make sure they were safe. Parents watched all this with quiet hope. They knew the journey would last lifetimes. Their children or their children's children might be the ones to set foot on a new world. And so they nurtured curiosity, encouraged dreams, and reminded them that though they were voyagers, they were never lost. Aria recorded these moments carefully in her notebook. The children carry a lightness that we as adults sometimes forget. Where we see distance, they see adventure. Where we feel sorrow, they find play. Perhaps the future will be safe in their hands because they are learning to grow without fear of the unknown. And so, among the hum of engines and the silence of space, laughter echoed. It was the sound of youth, of possibility, of beginnings. Aurora sailed forward, and with her sailed the children, the true heirs of the voyage. Aria often walked the quiet corridors of Aurora with her notebook pressed against her chest. While others tended to machines, studied stars, or raised children, her duty was different. She was not tasked with building the future, but with remembering the past. Each day she wrote carefully, her words slow and deliberate. She did not merely record events. She painted them with detail, with feeling, with fragments of memory. She wrote of the first night, of the silence that had filled the ship, of the children's laughter in the gardens. She wrote of faces she had seen, voices she had overheard, and the subtle shifts in mood as people adjusted to life between the stars. Her cabin became a sanctuary of stories. Shelves lined with old books, digital archives glowing softly on walls, and her own notebooks stacked neatly in rows. She treated them with reverence, for in those pages she carried more than ink and words. She carried the soul of Earth itself. Sometimes she sat with passengers who felt lost or lonely. They would tell her their memories of a seaside town, of the smell of bread baking at dawn, of the warmth of a summer breeze. Aria would listen patiently, then write their words down. She called them fragments of Earth, tiny windows into a world no one aboard could return to. Aria often walked the quiet corridors of Aurora with her notebook pressed against her chest. While others tended to machines, studied stars, or raised children, her duty was different. She was not tasked with building the future, but with remembering the past. Each day she wrote carefully, her words slow and deliberate. She did not merely record events. She painted them with detail, with feeling, with fragments of memory. She wrote of the first night, of the silence that had filled the ship, of the children's laughter in the gardens. She wrote of faces she had seen, voices she had overheard, and the subtle shifts in mood as people adjusted to life between the stars. Her cabin became a sanctuary of stories. Shelves lined with old books, digital archives glowing softly on walls, and her own notebooks stacked neatly in rows. She treated them with reverence, for in those pages she carried more than ink and words. She carried the soul of Earth itself. Sometimes she sat with passengers who felt lost or lonely. They would tell her their memories of a seaside town, of the smell of bread baking at dawn, of the warmth of a summer breeze. Aria would listen patiently, then write their words down. She called them fragments of Earth, tiny windows into a world no one aboard could return to. On the third evening, the gardens filled once more with quiet footsteps. Families drifted among the trees, children chasing one another across the grass, and elders sitting in silence with their eyes closed. The air was heavy with the scent of blossoms, carried gently by the artificial breeze. Aria stood near a low stone bench, A small group gathered around her. In her hands she held a worn book, its pages carefully preserved, edges yellowed by time. The children sat cross-legged at her feet, while the adults leaned against the trunks of trees, listening in stillness. She began to read, her voice slow and steady. Long ago, before machines carried us into the skies, sailors set their ships upon the sea. They had no engines, no maps drawn from the heavens. Instead, they looked up. They watched the stars, and by their light, they found their way. The children listened wide-eyed. Some tilted their heads back to the dome above, where real stars glittered faintly through the glass. For a moment, the past and the present blurred. The voyagers of Earth and the voyagers of Aurora seemed bound by the same eternal rhythm. Aria turned a page. The soft rustle of paper filled the pause. Then she read a poem written centuries before. We are but travelers, carried by tides unseen. The stars are lanterns, guiding us home again. Her voice carried the words gently, letting them linger in the still air. No one spoke. Even the children sat quietly, their play forgotten, caught in the spell of memory. When she finished, a young girl raised her hand. "Do the stars remember us?" she asked. Aria smiled softly. "Perhaps they do," she said. "Perhaps every gaze, every dream, every wish ever spoken beneath them is still carried in their light." When you look at a star, you are seeing a message sent long ago. In that way, yes, the stars remember. The girl nodded slowly, as if satisfied, and lay back on the grass to stare at the endless night. Others soon followed, reclining beneath the artificial trees, watching as the stars shone beyond the dome. Aria closed the book and rested it gently on her lap. She looked around at the faces, illuminated by soft golden light, and felt the weight of her role. She was not only a keeper of words, but a bridge between centuries. Her voice carried echoes of poets, sailors, dreamers, and wanderers long gone. Later in her notebook she wrote, "Tonight, the past spoke to us." The words of our ancestors are not silent. They are alive, as long as we choose to listen. In the voices of the past, we find courage for the future. The hum of the engines filled the quiet once more, steady and unbroken. Aurora sailed on, and within her walls, the voices of Earth whispered still. Days aboard Aurora began to blend into one another, each marked not by the rising and setting of a sun, but by the steady hum of the ship. Within her long corridors, life found its rhythm. Engineers walked slowly through the passageways, listening for the ship's subtle language, the faint vibration of pipes, the sigh of air vents, the constant heartbeat of the engines. They carried small tools, checking panels and conduits, whispering to one another about adjustments so minor they seemed invisible. Yet every detail mattered, for Aurora was not only a vessel, she was their world. Scientists spent long hours in laboratories, their eyes fixed on glowing displays. They measured particles of distant light, traced the patterns of stars, and spoke quietly about galaxies that shimmered beyond human reach. Though their work reached into the infinite, their voices remained calm, almost hushed, as if afraid to disturb the silence of space. Artists, too, found their place among the corridors. Musicians carried instruments of wood and string, their soft notes drifting through common halls. Painters gathered in small groups, spreading colors across canvas, capturing the glow of starlight as seen through the observation dome. Some children joined them, sketching with curious hands, their drawings simple but filled with wonder. In the dining halls, voices mingled in gentle conversation. Meals were shared not only for nourishment, but for comfort. Families gathered at long tables, passing dishes of fruit grown in the gardens, bread baked fresh in small ovens. The taste was familiar, and though no meal could truly replace the memory of Earth, it gave warmth, and with warmth came hope. The corridors themselves became places of meeting. People paused to talk, leaning against smooth walls, sharing stories of home or dreams of the future. Some spoke of oceans they had once seen, others of cities filled with light, while the younger passengers simply imagined worlds they had never known. Aria often wandered these corridors with her notebook. She listened to the small exchanges, the laughter, the quiet sighs. She wrote of the engineer's patience, the scientist's devotion, the artist's fragile joy. To her, every detail mattered. Each was a thread in the fabric of their shared life. She wrote, "Life aboard Aurora is not defined by grand events, but by small gestures. A shared meal, a song carried down a hallway, a child's laughter echoing against the walls. These are the moments that shape us, that give meaning to our voyage." At night, the lights dimmed and the corridors grew still. The echoes of footsteps faded, the hum of the engines remained, steady as ever, the one constant in their drifting world. And so, life in the corridors continued, quiet, patient, ordinary. Yet in that ordinariness was something profound. For even in the endless dark, humanity carried its rituals, its creativity, its need for connection. The corridors were not empty passages of metal. They were arteries, carrying the pulse of Earth into the heart of the stars. Even as life aboard Aurora settled into its gentle rhythm, memories of Earth lingered. At night, when the lights dimmed and corridors fell silent, many passengers dreamed of home. Some dreamed of oceans. They could almost hear the steady crash of waves, the salty air on their faces, the gulls calling overhead. In their sleep, they walked barefoot along endless shores, feeling sand shift beneath their feet. For a moment, they were no longer enclosed in steel walls, but standing beneath a boundless sky. Others dreamed of forests. They remembered the whisper of wind in tall branches, the earthy smell of moss and pine, the feeling of sunlight filtering through leaves. They dreamed of paths winding deep into green stillness, of rivers that glimmered like glass, of seasons changing gently around them. Some dreamed of cities. They saw streets alive with movement, lanterns glowing in the dark, the hum of voices and footsteps weaving together into music. They dreamed of marketplaces filled with colors and scents, of bridges arching over rivers, of laughter echoing between walls of stone and glass. Aria, too, dreamed of Earth. Her dreams were filled with words, the libraries she once walked, the scent of old pages, the quiet of reading rooms where only the turning of paper disturbed the silence. In her dreams, she held conversations with voices long gone, the poets and storytellers whose words she carried into the stars. During waking hours, passengers often shared their dreams. In dining halls or quiet corners of the gardens, they spoke softly of what they had seen in sleep. One man described a mountain peak where snow sparkled like diamonds in morning light. A woman told of the sound of church bells echoing across a valley. A child whispered of a meadow full of fireflies, glowing like little stars. Sometimes their voices trembled with longing, but more often, they carried a gentle peace. Dreams were gifts, reminders that Earth lived within them still. Even in the silence of space, the memory of oceans, forests, and cities found ways to rise again. Aria wrote in her notebook, "Dreams are the bridges we carry. They remind us that Earth is not lost. It breathes through us, through our thoughts, through the worlds we create in sleep. If the stars are far, then let dreams be close. They keep us whole." At night, the observation dome often filled with sleepers who lay beneath the stars, wrapped in blankets. Some closed their eyes quickly, lulled by the hum of the engines. Others stared upward, letting starlight blur into their imagination. Slowly, gently, Aurora became not just a ship of travelers, but a ship of dreamers, drifting between two homes, one remembered and one yet to come. As days stretched into weeks, the passengers of Aurora began to notice the silence of space in a new way. It was not empty, as many had first imagined. It seemed alive, filled with presence, with quiet depth, with something just beyond words. At night, in the observation dome, families gathered to watch the stars. The glass stretched above and around them, offering an endless view of the galaxy. The stars burned sharper here than on Earth, each one a pinprick of light against the black. At first, people only gazed, but soon whispers began. Some said the stars spoke to them, not in voices that could be heard, but in feelings that stirred deep inside. A child said she felt comfort, as if the stars were guardians watching over their ship. An elder described a sense of peace, like a lullaby too soft for ears, but not for the heart. Others claimed they felt questions, as though the universe itself was curious about them, about this small vessel drifting between worlds. Aria listened carefully to these words. She recorded them in her notebook, not as fact, but as fragments of experience. "The stars do not speak," she wrote, "and yet they are not silent. They are mirrors. We look into them, and in return we see ourselves. We give them our dreams, our fears, our longing, and they shine it back as light." One evening, she sat with a small group in the dome. No one spoke for a long while. The engines hummed softly beneath their feet, but all else was still. Then a boy whispered, "Do the stars hear us?" His voice trembled with both fear and wonder. The captain, who had quietly joined them, answered gently, "Perhaps they do. Or perhaps what we hear is our own hearts reflected back. But does it matter? If the stars comfort us, if they guide us, then their silence is as powerful as any voice." The boy nodded, and the dome returned to stillness. Above them, constellations stretched like ancient maps. Some were familiar, the shapes known for millennia. Others were strange, unseen from Earth, their patterns only now revealed. The passengers traced them with their eyes, inventing stories, giving names. Slowly, a sense of connection grew, not to Earth, not even to Aurora, but to the vastness itself. The stars were no longer distant fires. They were companions, patient and eternal, whispering in their own way. That night, As lights dimmed and people drifted to sleep, Aria wrote again. The stars remind us that we are not alone. They do not speak in words, yet they speak in presence. In their endless glow, we find both our smallness and our belonging. Perhaps this is what it means to journey, not only to travel outward, but to listen inward. And so Aurora continued forward, guided not only by engines and charts, but by whispers, quiet, unseen, yet deeply felt, the whispers of the stars. Life aboard Aurora was never meant to be measured only in days or years. The voyage stretched far beyond a single lifetime. Everyone aboard knew this truth, though it was often left unspoken. Their journey was not for themselves alone, but for those yet to be born. In the dining halls, conversations sometimes turned toward the future. Parents wondered aloud what kind of world their children would inherit. Would it be a planet rich with oceans and forests, or a place entirely unlike Earth? Some hoped their descendants would step into paradise. Others prepared themselves for the possibility of struggle, of building a new home stone by stone. Children listened quietly when these words arose. Some asked simple questions. Will I see another sun? Will my children walk on new soil? The answers were gentle but uncertain, for no one could promise when or how the journey would end. Aria thought often about these generations ahead. In her notebook, she wrote, "We plant seeds we will never see grow." Our voyage is an act of faith. The children of our children will be the ones to walk beneath alien skies. Our task is to leave them a story, a memory, and the courage to continue. The ship itself seemed to acknowledge this truth. Aurora was not built only for the present. She carried classrooms filled with teachers, gardens rich with food, archives of knowledge stretching across centuries. She was a cradle for generations, prepared to nurture life long after her first passengers were gone. In the observation dome, parents sometimes lifted their children high, pointing toward distant stars. "One of those may be yours," they whispered. The children's eyes widened, filled with wonder, even if they could not grasp the distance of light years. For them, the stars were not impossibly far. They were promises waiting to be kept. Musicians composed songs for the unborn, melodies that drifted through the corridors like prayers. Artists painted murals along the walls, images of imagined worlds, emerald forests, crimson seas, golden skies. They said, "If our children cannot yet see their world, let us give them a vision to carry." And so life aboard Aurora became more than survival. It became legacy. Every story told, every lesson taught, every meal shared was a gift for the generations ahead. Aria often closed her eyes at night and imagined a child, centuries from now, stepping onto new soil. She imagined that child carrying her words, her memories, her echoes of Earth, and she felt peace. Aurora sailed on, steady and patient, carrying not just 1,000 souls, but countless futures. The ship was a bridge across time, and every heartbeat aboard was a step toward tomorrow. Time aboard Aurora began to lose its edges. Without the turning of Earth, without the rise and fall of a sun, days drifted together. Hours became soft, indistinct. What remained constant was the hum of the engines, a steady rhythm that never faltered. People moved more slowly now, not from fatigue, but from adjustment. Their bodies and minds had settled into the ship's tempo. Meals came and went like tides. Work followed, then quiet rest, then more work again. The cycle repeated, unchanging, like a song with endless verses. In the corridors, voices grew softer. Conversations lingered in whispers. The echoes of laughter still filled the gardens and learning halls. But even those sounds carried a gentle weight. It was as if the ship itself taught patience, guiding every heart into the same unhurried beat. The silence of space seeped into them. Through the observation dome, the stars glimmered, countless and eternal. At times, passengers simply sat together in stillness, gazing outward. No words were needed. The vastness spoke for itself. Its voice was silence, and its silence was enough. Aria felt this silence deeply. She wrote, "The long quiet is not emptiness. It is a presence. It holds us. It steadies us. It reminds us of our place. In the silence, fear dissolves. In the silence, time is no longer an enemy. It becomes a companion." Nights stretched gently. Some passengers fell asleep quickly, lulled by the soft vibration beneath their beds. Others lay awake, listening, letting the hum of the ship blend with their thoughts until dreams finally came. The silence carried them, as surely as the engines carried the ship forward. Children, too, grew used to it. At first, they asked why space made no sound. Now they accepted it, even cherished it. Some called it the great lullaby. They said it was like being wrapped in invisible arms, safe and endless. The silence was not always comforting. At times it reminded people of distance, of the impossibility of return. But even then, it held them, offering no sharp edges, only depth. Aurora sailed on, cradled by quiet. The stars burned without sound. The engines whispered without pause. And within the ship, 1,000 souls drifted together through the long silence. Aurora drifted onward, steady and patient, her path stretching into the unknown. To those aboard, the ship was no longer just steel and circuits. She had become a living presence, a cradle for memory, a keeper of hope. Her engines pulsed with quiet strength, and in their rhythm many heard something familiar, a heartbeat. Aria walked once more to the observation dome. She carried her notebook, though tonight she did not write. Instead, she simply looked outward. The stars glowed, countless and eternal. But her eyes fell instead on the faint blue spark far behind. Earth, distant now, barely visible, yet still shining. Others joined her, gathering silently beneath the vast glass. Some parents lifted their children, pointing toward that pale dot. "There," they whispered, "that is where we began." The children squinted, uncertain, for to them it was already too small, too faint. Yet the words etched themselves into their memory. "That is home." Aria finally opened her notebook and wrote slowly, her hand steady. "Though we sail far, Earth sails with us. It lives in our breath, in our voices, in the rhythm of our hearts. Aurora does not carry strangers. She carries fragments of a planet, woven together into a future." The silence in the dome was deep, but not heavy. It was filled with a sense of connection, as if the ship itself listened. Passengers stood shoulder to shoulder, some weeping quietly, others smiling faintly. No speeches were needed. The heartbeat of the engines spoke for them all. Later that night, as lights dimmed and the ship drifted into another endless stretch of stars, Aria closed her eyes and imagined Earth not as a place left behind, but as a presence carried forward. In dreams, she felt its forests, its oceans, its cities alive within her. She felt it in the laughter of children, in the songs of musicians, in the stories whispered through corridors. Aurora was no longer a ship alone in the dark. She was Earth's echo, Earth's memory, Earth's heartbeat extended into the stars. And so the story of their voyage did not end. It began again, with every step forward, with every dream dreamed, with every heartbeat aboard. Aurora sailed on, and with her, Earth sailed too, endless, patient, and eternal.